I bought a house, but my parents broke into house my sister's family for free. Instead of screaming, I legally trapped her, cut the power, and watched them flee into the cold night forever. I am 32 years old, and for the last decade of my life, I have operated like a machine. I work as a corporate risk analyst, a job that essentially means I look at massive disasters, calculate the damage, and figure out how to stop the bleeding. It is a high-stress, high-reward career. I routinely pull 80-hour work weeks, surviving on black coffee, sheer willpower, and the quiet, desperate need to prove that I am worth something. All of that grinding, all of those missed holidays and sleepless nights, finally culminated in one massive achievement. I bought my dream house. It is a sprawling 3,000-square-foot sanctuary nestled in a quiet, upscale neighborhood. Every single inch of it was customized to my exact liking. I had pristine white quartz countertops installed in the kitchen. I bought plush, cloud-like white sofas for the living room. The entire property was hardwired into a state-of-the-art smart home system. I could control the locks, the security cameras, the ambient lighting, and the central heating right from an app on my phone. It was my fortress. It was the only place in the world where I felt completely safe and entirely in control. But to understand why this house meant so much to me, you have to understand the family I came from. Growing up, I was never the priority. My mother, Evelyn, had 2 daughters, but in her eyes, there was only one that mattered. My older sister, Madison. Madison is 35 now, but she has spent her entire life operating under the golden child syndrome. She never had to work hard. She never had to face the consequences of her actions. If Madison failed a class, the teacher was unfair. If Madison maxed out a credit card, the economy was too tough. Evelyn always swooped in to save her. And me? I was the backup generator. I was the one who was expected to be quiet, be perfect, and ask for nothing. When I was 18, Evelyn drained my college savings account to pay off Madison's legal fees after a reckless driving incident. When I cried about it, my mother looked at me with cold eyes and said, "Family helps family, Quinn. You're smart, you will figure it out." And I did figure it out. I took out massive student loans, I worked 3 jobs, and I built my own empire from the ground up without a single dime from them. Madison, meanwhile, married a guy named Logan, a 36-year-old man whose primary hobby seems to be avoiding employment. Together, they have a 5-year-old son named Wyatt. For years, I kept my distance. I showed up for Thanksgiving, I smiled, I gave Wyatt expensive birthday gifts, and I went back to my quiet, organized life. I thought that by becoming wildly successful and financially independent, I would finally earn my mother's respect. I thought she would look at my beautiful new house, my 6-figure salary, and finally say, "I am proud of you, Quinn." But I was so completely naive. I did not realize that to a toxic family, your success is not a virtue. It is a resource. They do not look at your stability and feel proud. They look at your stability and feel entitled to it. And I was about to learn that lesson in the most brutal way imaginable. It was mid-January, and the weather had turned incredibly bitter. I was supposed to be in London for a 2-week risk assessment conference. I had packed my bags, locked down my house, and headed to the airport. But while I was sitting in the departure lounge, sipping an overpriced latte, the overhead speakers crackled to life. A massive winter storm system had unexpectedly grounded all international flights out of the Northeast. The airline agent at the desk told me the earliest they could get me out was in 3 days. Exhausted and frustrated, I dragged my luggage out to the curb and called an Uber. It was a miserable, freezing ride back to the suburbs. The rain had turned into a thick, icy sleet that coated the windows of the car. I did not bother calling my mother or my sister to tell them my trip was delayed. We did not have the kind of relationship where we texted each other everyday updates. All I wanted to do was crawl into my custom king-sized bed, turn the heating up to 72 degrees, and sleep for 14 hours. The Uber dropped me off at the end of my driveway. I pulled my heavy suitcase up the front walkway, shivering as the icy wind cut through my wool coat. I reached the front porch and walked up to my custom, solid oak front door. I lifted my hand to type my access code into the digital keypad. but my hand stopped in midair. My brain simply could not process what I was looking at. Right beneath my sleek, high-tech smart lock, there was a jagged, splintered hole bored directly into the expensive wood. And shoved into that ruined hole was a cheap, shiny, manual brass deadbolt. My breath caught in my throat. My first thought was that I had been robbed. Someone had taken a power drill to my front door while I was gone. Panic spiked in my chest. I dropped the handle of my suitcase and reached for my phone to dial 911. But as I stood there in the freezing sleet, my ears picked up a sound coming from inside my house. It was not the sound of burglars rummaging through my belongings. It was the upbeat, annoying theme song of a children's cartoon playing loudly on my living room television. Mixed with that was the distinct sound of a woman laughing. My blood ran completely cold. I knew that laugh. I stepped closer to the door, my heart hammering against my ribs, and pressed my thumb against the doorbell camera. A few seconds later, I heard heavy footsteps approaching the entryway. The cheap brass deadbolt clicked loudly. The door slowly cracked open, secured by a heavy chain lock. Staring back at me through the 2-inch gap was my mother, Evelyn. She did not look surprised to see me. She did not look guilty. She just kept her hand firmly on the door frame, blocking my view. "We thought you were in London," she said. Her voice was flat, totally devoid of any warmth or apology. It was the tone of a person who was slightly annoyed that a door-to-door salesperson had interrupted her evening. I stood there, freezing rain dripping from my hair, staring at the woman who had given birth to me. The realization of what had happened hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. They had not just broken into my home. They had moved in. "Open the door, Mom," I said. My voice was dangerously low, vibrating in my chest. I was not asking her. I was warning her. Evelyn hesitated for a second, then unlatched the chain and cracked the door open another foot, keeping her body planted firmly in the entryway. "Keep your voice down," she hissed at me. "Wyatt is trying to watch his show." I pushed past her shoulder, stepping into the foyer of my own house, and the sight before me made my vision blur with pure rage. My pristine, quiet sanctuary had been turned into a disaster zone. Over my mother's shoulder, I saw my sister Madison lounging on my cloud-white sofa. She was wearing my expensive cashmere robe. In one hand, she held a glass of my good red wine, and her bare feet were propped up on my glass coffee table. Sitting next to her was Logan, eating a slice of greasy pizza right out of the box, crumbs falling onto the upholstery. And bouncing up and down on the opposite cushion was 5-year-old Wyatt, his sticky hands smacking against the white fabric. The entire house smelled like cheap garlic, stale wine, and entitlement. "Madison lost her apartment," Evelyn said from behind me, speaking as if that perfectly explained why someone had taken a power drill to my front door. "Her landlord evicted them yesterday." What were we supposed to do? Let them sleep in Logan's van? "She needs this house more than you do, Quinn." "I live here," I shot back, the anger finally boiling over. "This is my house. You broke the law. You drilled through my door." "Oh, do not be so dramatic," Madison chimed in from the couch, taking a slow sip of her wine. "It is just a lock. We will pay you back when Logan gets his business off the ground. Besides, you have 3 bedrooms, 3,000 square feet, and it is just you and your laptop. It is selfish to hoard all this space when your nephew is basically homeless." Evelyn crossed her arms, standing like a guard dog between me and the living room. "It is already done, Quinn. We moved their beds into the guest rooms this morning. I even went down to the elementary school 2 blocks over and enrolled Wyatt for the semester. He starts on Monday." They had executed what military strategists call a fait accompli, an accomplished fact. By moving the furniture, changing the locks, and registering the kid for the local school, they had created a reality on the ground that made reversing it seem impossible. They were not asking for a favor. They were daring me to be the monster who throws them out. "If you kick them out tonight," Evelyn whispered, leaning in close so only I could hear, "the police will come, and the neighbors will watch a rich, selfish aunt throw a crying 5-year-old boy out into the freezing rain. Is that who you want to be?" She was leveraging my shame. She was banking on my morality to subsidize Madison's absolute lack of it. I looked at the grease stains on my sofa. I looked at the smug smile on my sister's face. I need to think, I said, my voice trembling. You do that, Evelyn said, looking triumphant. She practically pushed me back out onto the porch and shut the door in my face. The heavy click of that unauthorized deadbolt echoed into the cold night. I stumbled backward off the porch, the freezing rain mixing with the hot tears welling up in my eyes. I walked down the driveway and climbed into my rental car, slamming the door shut. I started the engine, blasting the heater on maximum, and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned completely white. I sat there in the dark, staring through the rain-slicked windshield at the warm, glowing lights of my own living room. Lights that I paid the electric bill for. I was effectively homeless at my own address. The betrayal cut so deep it physically ached. For a few minutes, I just let myself cry. I cried for the 18-year-old version of myself who had her college funds stolen. I cried for the 25-year-old version of myself who worked through every holiday while Madison got bailed out of debt after debt. I had genuinely believed that if I just built a good enough life, my family would eventually respect my boundaries. But sitting in that freezing car, the final, painful truth settled over me. To Evelyn and Madison, I was not a person with feelings, rights, or ownership. I was a silo of grain to be harvested whenever the golden child was hungry. My stability was not something they admired. It was just a backup generator for their endless chaos. They thought they had checkmated me. They thought they had backed me into a corner where my only options were to surrender my home or look like a villain on the evening news. But as the tears dried on my face, the crushing sadness began to evaporate. It was replaced by something else. Something cold, hard, and terrifyingly calm. They had forgotten one very important detail about who I am. I am a corporate risk analyst. I dismantle complex, high-stakes disasters for a living. I negotiate with hostile entities, and I never, ever enter a situation without a kill switch. I reached up and wiped my face with the sleeve of my coat. The emotional, wounded daughter who craved her mother's love died in that car. In her place, a corporate strategist woke up. I stared at the house. If I marched up to that door and called the police to report a break-in, Evelyn would start screaming. Madison would start crying. Wyatt would wail. The cops would see a messy family dispute, throw their hands up, and declare it a civil matter. The police do not like evicting people without a court order, especially when there is a child involved and the people have moved their furniture in. If the cops called it a civil matter, Madison would officially be classified as a squatter, or worse, a tenant. My brain started rapidly sorting through the property laws of my state. The legal distinction between a tenant and a guest is a massive, dangerous canyon. If Madison established tenancy, which she was actively trying to do by receiving mail there and enrolling her son in the local school, getting rid of her would be a nightmare. A landlord-tenant relationship means I would have to file a formal eviction notice. I would have to wait 30 to 60 days just for a hearing. Then, the court process could drag on for 6 entire months. During those 6 months, Madison and Logan would live in my house rent-free, destroying my property out of spite, and I would not be legally allowed to change the locks or shut off the utilities. That was the trap they had set for me. But there was a loophole. A beautiful, ruthless legal loophole. I needed to change their classification. I could not let them be tenants, but I also could not throw them out tonight. I needed them to become something else entirely. I needed them to become licensees. In property law, a licensee is someone who has permission to be on the property for a specific purpose, usually tied to employment. Like a live-in nanny, a hotel guest, or a property caretaker. A tenant pays rent and has possession of the property. But an employee whose housing is strictly tied to their job has no property rights whatsoever. If the employment ends, the housing license ends immediately. There is no eviction court. There is no 30-day notice. Once they are fired, they are trespassing, and the police will absolutely remove a trespasser. I reached into the glove compartment, pulled out a notepad, and started outlining the plan. I needed Madison to sign an employment contract. But Madison hated working. She had not held a real job in 7 years. I needed bait. Something so incredibly tempting, so shiny and valuable, that her natural greed would override her suspicion. What do unemployed people with bad credit and a child desperately need? Healthcare. Logan's freelance odd jobs barely paid for their groceries, let alone dental or vision insurance. If I offered her a fake job on my company's payroll, complete with top-tier corporate health benefits, she would dive at it like a starving dog. I turned the car engine off. The cold logic of the plan settled my heart rate. I pulled down the sun visor, checked my reflection in the mirror, and practiced a look of total defeat. It was time to play the game. I walked back up the icy driveway and knocked on the front door. This time, Evelyn opened it holding a warm plate of lasagna. She had a smug, sickeningly sweet smile plastered across her face. "I knew you would be sensible, Quinn," she said, extending the plate toward me. Come in, come in. The lasagna is fresh." I ignored the food. I stepped into the hallway, keeping my posture slumped and my eyes downcast, playing the role of the broken, compliant daughter perfectly. "I have thought about it," I said, letting my voice sound exhausted. "You are right, Mom. I cannot throw Madison and Wyatt out onto the street in the middle of winter. It would be wrong." Evelyn's shoulders dropped 3 inches in pure relief. Victory washed over her face. "Oh, thank God," she breathed out. "I knew you had a heart in there somewhere. Your sister is just going through a tough time. This will bring us all closer together, you will see." "But," I said, raising a hand to stop her from pulling me into a hug, "if they are staying here, we need to do this the right way. I cannot have 3 extra people living in this house off the books. My homeowner's insurance will not cover it. If Wyatt falls down the stairs and breaks his arm, the insurance company will deny the claim because they are unauthorized residents. I would be personally liable for massive medical bills." Evelyn waved a hand dismissively. "We do not need to involve insurance companies. It is just family helping family." "Actually, Mom, I have a much better idea," I said, stepping past her and walking into the living room where Madison was still lounging. I made sure to project my voice so my sister could hear every word. "If Madison stays here as my official property caretaker, I can put her on my company's payroll. It acts as a massive tax write-off for me. And for her, well, it means she gets full corporate health insurance." I saw Madison's ears practically perk up from the sofa. She lowered her wine glass and sat up straight. "Health insurance?" she asked, her eyes narrowing with sudden interest. "Like dental and vision too?" "Everything," I lied smoothly, maintaining eye contact. "Gold tier. 0 deductibles. Full coverage for you, Logan, and Wyatt. But to make it legal and get the insurance company to approve it, you have to be classified as my employee. That means signing a standard caretaker employment contract." It was the ultimate greed hook. I watched the gears turning in Madison's head. The promise of free, high-end medical benefits was the exact thing that could blind her to any fine print. She looked at Logan, who nodded eagerly. "I can have the papers drawn up and printed in 20 minutes, I said, pulling my laptop out of my bag. "The job description is literally just to keep the house standing while I am traveling. In exchange, you get free room, free board, and the benefits package." "That sounds really generous," Madison said. She was naturally suspicious of me, but the sheer laziness and greed in her soul were winning the battle. "It is a win-win," I said, pulling out a chair at the kitchen island. "I get my tax break, and you get complete security." Thank you for following the story this far. If you're interested in how Quinn turns the tables, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to leave a comment with the name of the city you live in. Every interaction helps the video reach more people. Thank you so much, and now let's see how the trap falls. I sat at my own kitchen island, the cold surface of the quartz pressing against my forearms. Right next to my laptop was a sticky ring of spilled apple juice that someone had neglected to wipe up. I stared at it for a second, letting the disrespect fuel my focus. I opened a blank document and began to type. I was not writing a standard lease agreement. A lease creates a landlord and tenant relationship, which in this state means I would need a court order and 6 months of legal battles to evict her. I was writing a caretaker agreement. Internally, I recited the legal distinction like a mantra to keep myself calm. A tenant pays rent and has possession. A licensee, like a hotel guest or a live-in nanny, has a revocable privilege to be on the property. If the employment ends, the license ends immediately. There is no probate. There is no eviction court. It is just a trespassing charge. I typed out the document, making sure to dress it up in heavy corporate jargon so it looked completely standard and incredibly boring. But hidden inside the dense paragraphs of the benefits section were the lethal clauses. First, I added Clause 4A, housing is provided strictly as a condition of employment. Then came Clause 9C, termination of employment results in the immediate revocation of the housing license. That was the magic sentence. That was the kill switch. But I needed more than just a legal right to throw them out. I needed eyes on them, and I needed to know exactly what kind of financial disaster I was dealing with. So, I added Clause 12, stating that the employee consents to 24/7 video monitoring in common areas for asset protection purposes. And finally, the nail in the coffin. Clause 15. The employee authorizes the employer to conduct comprehensive background and credit checks for insurance bonding. I reviewed the document one last time. It was an ironclad, legally binding trap, disguised as a golden ticket. I sent the document to my wireless printer, which was sitting on the home office desk just down the hall. Thankfully, Logan had not unplugged it to charge his phone. I walked over, retrieved the warm pages, and slid them across the granite countertop toward Madison. Here you go, I said, keeping my voice light and professional. Sign this, and you are officially covered by my corporate policy. Madison picked up the pen. Evelyn hovered over her shoulder, practically vibrating with impatience and beaming like she had single-handedly brokered world peace. They thought they had just secured a free ride for life. They had absolutely no idea they were about to sign a confession. Madison scanned the document, her eyes darting over the paragraphs like a stone skipping across the water. She was not actually reading a single legal term. I could see exactly what she was doing. She was hunting for keywords. She was looking for the words benefits, salary, and zero rent. Do I really have to log maintenance hours? Madison asked, tapping a perfectly manicured fingernail on page 3. Logan does most of the heavy lifting around here anyway. It is just for the Internal Revenue Service audit trail, I lied smoothly, leaning against the counter and keeping my posture relaxed. Just put down 5 hours a week for watering the indoor plants and checking the heating system. As long as the paperwork exists, the medical benefits apply. Just sign it, Madison, Evelyn snapped, her patience wearing thin. Your sister is offering you a lifeline. Do not pick it apart until it breaks. Madison let out a dramatic, put-upon sigh, the kind of sigh that belonged to someone who felt they were being forced to accept charity. She clicked the pen. Fine. But I need the insurance card by Monday. Wyatt has a checkup. I promised her the card would arrive by Monday. She pressed the pen to the paper. The blue ink flowed, carving her name onto the signature line. Madison Miller. I watched the loops of her handwriting close. It was a fascinating, terrifying moment. In her mind, she was signing a lease for a free mansion. In the eyes of the law, she was signing a confession that she had zero property rights. That signature stripped her of every tenant protection the state offered. The trap snapped shut the moment she lifted the pen. And here, I said, signing my own name at the bottom with a flourish. It is official. Welcome to the payroll. I pulled a small slip of paper from my coat pocket and slid it across the counter. These are the new temporary door codes. I reactivated the smart locks on the back and side doors. As for the manual deadbolt you installed on the front door, let us just keep that unlocked for now. It is a fire safety hazard, and I need to have a contractor look at it when I get back. Evelyn snatched the paper up eagerly. See? Was that so hard? She said, her voice dripping with condescending satisfaction. Now we can all breathe and be a family again. I have to go, I said, checking my watch and widening my eyes in fake panic. My flight to London was delayed, but they just sent an alert saying it leaves in 3 hours. I still need to get through security at the airport. Go, go, Evelyn said, literally shooing me toward the front door with her hands. She was already walking toward my stainless steel refrigerator, claiming my territory as her own. We will hold down the fort. Have a safe trip, sweetie. I walked out the front door, the exact same door they had barred me from entering just an hour ago. I got back into my rental car and drove down the block. But I was not going to the airport. I was not going to London. I drove exactly 3 miles down the highway and pulled into the parking lot of an Embassy Suites hotel. I checked into a junior suite on the 4th floor, ordered a club sandwich from room service, and set up my command center on the small hotel desk. I opened my laptop and pulled out my iPad. With a few taps, I opened the smart home security application. The live feeds from my house popped up in crisp 4K resolution. The living room, the kitchen, the hallways, all perfectly visible. I was ready to watch my life fall apart, and more importantly, I was ready to document every single second of it. On the screen of my iPad, my beautiful home looked like a fraternity house after a 3-day bender. It had been less than 6 hours since I handed them the contract, and Madison was already breaking every single rule of basic human decency, let alone the employment agreement. She sat at my kitchen island, a lit cigarette dangling carelessly from her fingers. She was ashing directly onto my white quartz countertop, the gray soot smearing against the pristine stone. Smoke curled up toward the ceiling sensors. In the living room, little Wyatt was running around with a permanent blue marker, drawing jagged lines across my freshly painted white walls. Evelyn just sat in the armchair, watching him do it with a fond smile on her face. She did not even attempt to stop him. A few minutes later, the front door opened, and Logan dragged a massive, filthy recliner chair into the house. The fabric was stained, and the wooden legs scraped loudly against my expensive hardwood floors. I took a slow sip of my hotel wine. The disrespect was total. It was absolute, and best of all, it was fully recorded in high definition. Madison pulled her cell phone out of her pocket and dialed a number. Because I had installed premium interior cameras, the audio feed was crystal clear. I turned the volume all the way up on my laptop. "Yeah, she is gone," Madison laughed loudly into the receiver. "Total sucker. She actually thinks I am going to maintain the heating and cooling system. Please. I am never leaving this place. It is basically mine now. Mom says Quinn owes us for all the years she did not help out financially." I felt a cold, dark wave of satisfaction wash over me. I was not even angry anymore. Every cigarette ash, every marker stain, every mocking word was a documented breach of the caretaker contract. She was building my legal case for me, brick by brick. The next morning, I woke up early, grabbed a cup of bad hotel coffee, and immediately checked the live camera feeds. The house was quiet. Evelyn and Logan were asleep. But Madison was awake, and she was acting incredibly paranoid. I watched through the kitchen camera as she paced back and forth, looking out the front window every 2 minutes. Finally, a white mail delivery truck pulled up to the curb. Madison practically sprinted out the front door. A moment later, she reappeared on the screen, clutching a thick stack of mail. Most of it was mine, but there were several large, brown envelopes mixed in. She did not open them. She looked nervously over her shoulder, checking the hallway to make sure Evelyn was not watching. Then, she quickly walked into the walk-in pantry. She shoved the entire stack of brown envelopes onto the top shelf, hiding them behind 3 large boxes of cereal. My eyes narrowed. People do not hide junk mail from their own mothers. People hide warnings. People hide threats. I leaned forward in my hotel chair and tapped the screen of my iPad. I activated the digital zoom function on the pantry camera. The 4K resolution held up beautifully. The camera zoomed in close enough for me to read the bold, angry black ink stamped across the top left corner of the most prominent envelope. It read, "Gallagher and Pierce, Attorneys at Law, Collections Division." I paused the video feed and stared at the name. It all clicked into place. Madison had not just been casually evicted because times were tough. She was running from something massive, and she was terrified her mother would find out. It was time to pull the trigger on Clause 15. I opened a new tab on my laptop and logged into a premium corporate background check portal. Because Madison had signed the caretaker agreement authorizing a comprehensive background and credit check, I was legally cleared to run her social security number through the deepest databases available. I typed in her information, paid the $75 expedited processing fee, and waited. The loading bar crawled across the screen. When the final report generated, it was a 50-page document of absolute financial devastation. I scrolled through the pages, my jaw slowly dropping. Madison and Logan were not just poor, struggling parents. They were professional grifters. In the last 4 years, they had 3 separate evictions on their record. They had maxed out 12 different credit cards, all of which were currently in default. But the most shocking piece of information was buried on page 42. There was an active, ongoing civil lawsuit filed against them by the law firm of Gallagher and Pierce. They were being sued for $30,000 in unpaid rent and severe property damage by their last landlord. According to the legal notes, the process server had been trying to track them down for 3 weeks to hand them the official court summons. Madison had abandoned her last apartment in the middle of the night to avoid being served. She was not just looking for a free place to crash. She was a legal fugitive hiding from a $30,000 lawsuit, and she was using my house as her bunker. She thought she was squatting in a free mansion, completely off the grid. She did not realize she was living inside a glass house, and I held the remote control to every single door and window. I woke up on the 3rd day of my hotel stay. I walked over to the window and pulled back the curtains. Outside, a brutal winter storm had finally descended on the city. Thick, heavy snow was falling sideways, and the wind was howling against the glass. The local news predicted temperatures would drop to a blistering 15 degrees Fahrenheit by the afternoon. It was the perfect weather for an eviction. I sat down at my laptop and opened my email client. I drafted a very short, very formal message to Madison. It read, "Dear Madison, effective immediately, your employment as property caretaker is terminated due to multiple documented breaches of contract, including indoor smoking, intentional property damage, and the falsification of background information regarding your active civil lawsuit. Per Clause 9C of your agreement, your license to occupy the premises is revoked instantly. You have 2 hours to vacate my property." I hit send. But I knew an email was not going to make her leave. She would just laugh, claim squatters' rights, and pour herself another glass of my wine. She needed to feel the consequences physically. I picked up my iPad and opened the Smart Home Administrator hub. First, I disabled the broadband Wi-Fi router. Next, I sent a command to the smart refrigerator, locking the digital screen and disabling the ice and water dispensers. Then I executed the masterstroke. I accessed the central heating and air conditioning system. I overrode the manual thermostat on the wall, dropping the internal temperature of the entire house to a freezing 50 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 10 degrees Celsius. Finally, I locked the system with a complex administrator passcode. The digital execution was complete. I switched over to the camera feeds to watch the chaos unfold. For the first 20 minutes, nothing happened. Then, the ambient temperature in the house began to plummet. On the living room camera, I saw Logan pull a blanket tightly around his shoulders. Evelyn walked over to the wall thermostat and started aggressively pushing the buttons. The screen flashed red, displaying a message that read, "Locked by administrator." Evelyn yelled something to Madison, who came jogging into the hallway. Madison pulled out her cell phone. Because the Wi-Fi was dead, she had to rely on her cellular data. I watched her face as she opened her email app. She read my termination notice. The color completely drained from her face. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. Panic instantly set in. She started screaming at Logan, waving the phone in his face. Logan jumped up from the sofa, looking terrified. Evelyn pulled her own phone out and dialed my number over and over again. My hotel phone stayed perfectly silent. I had blocked all of their numbers the night before. The house was turning into an icebox. I could actually see the faint puffs of white mist coming from their mouths as they breathed. The psychological terror of the situation was finally hitting them. They could not turn on the heat. They could not use the internet. They could not call the police because they knew they had signed an employment contract, and calling the cops would only result in them being escorted off the property for trespassing. They were trapped in a freezing, hostile environment, and they had absolutely zero control. The sanctuary they thought they had stolen was actively rejecting them. But I was not quite finished. I picked up my cell phone and dialed a local number. A receptionist answered on the second ring. Gallagher and Pierce, Collections Division. How may I help you? I cleared my throat. Yes, hello. I have some information regarding an active lawsuit against a Madison Miller and a Logan Miller. I believe your process servers have been looking for them. The receptionist put me through to a paralegal immediately. I gave them my exact home address and told them the targets were currently inside, but preparing to flee. They assured me a process server was in the area and would be dispatched immediately. 45 minutes later, I watched the front porch camera. A man in a heavy winter coat walked up my icy steps and knocked loudly on the front door. Inside, the camera showed absolute panic. Madison crept up to the window and peeked through the blinds. When she saw the man holding a thick manila envelope, she completely broke. The reality of the $30,000 lawsuit, combined with the unbearable, freezing temperatures inside the house, shattered whatever entitlement she had left. She did not even answer the door. She just turned around and started screaming at Logan to pack. It was a chaotic, humiliating exodus. They grabbed black plastic trash bags from the kitchen and started frantically stuffing their clothes into them. They abandoned the dirty recliner. They abandoned the food in the fridge. Logan grabbed little Wyatt, wrapped him in a heavy coat, and dragged him out the side door toward their rusted van. Evelyn followed closely behind, looking bewildered and shivering violently. Madison was the last one out, clutching her trash bags, looking over her shoulder one last time before fleeing into the blinding snow. As soon as the van backed out of my driveway, I tapped my iPad. I remotely reset every single access code, disabled the manual locks, and officially sealed my home forever. By noon the next day, a professional cleaning crew had scrubbed the house from top to bottom. The marker stains were gone, the smell of smoke was eradicated, and the heating system was back to a comfortable 72 degrees. I walked through the front door, the heavy silence of the empty house washing over me like a warm blanket. I poured myself a glass of red wine, sat down on my pristine white sofa, and took a deep breath. I learned a massive lesson that week. The most powerful punishment you can inflict on toxic people is not screaming at them. It is the cold, calculated withdrawal of your resources. Evelyn still leaves me sobbing voicemails from prepaid burner phones. She calls me a monster for throwing her babies out into a winter storm. She tells me that being a family means leaving the door unlocked, no matter what they do to you. So, I leave it to you to decide. Am I the asshole for legally freezing my sister out of my life? Or did they get exactly what they deserved? Thank you so much for watching and making it to the end of this story. If you enjoyed watching an entitled family get outsmarted at their own game, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more stories of ultimate karma and family drama.